Hi, I'm Michael Ruvinsky from the Center for Election Science. Most of us realize at this point that the voting method we use in this country has serious flaws, does not produce a great democracy, and needs to be replaced ASAP. And until recently, if you were into democracy reform, there was really only one method out there that had any kind of traction, and that was ranked choice voting, or RCV. However, there is a new voting method in town called approval voting, which now has a track record and which has some really interesting benefits to recommend it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between approval voting and ranked choice voting. People often assume that these methods are similar when really they have almost nothing in common. They are both voting methods. They are both an improvement over the status quo, but they do entirely different things and they have different benefits and shortcomings. I'm going to argue that the benefits of approval voting outweigh those of ranked choice, but again, both of these methods are improvements over the status quo. One thing people like about ranked choice voting is that you get to differentiate in a way between all of the candidates. You don't get to say whether you like a candidate or how much you like them or whether you support them, but you do get to say, I like this candidate better than this other candidate, and I like that candidate better than this other one, and I like that one better than this other one. Whereas with approval voting, you've only got two buckets. These are the candidates I support, and these are the candidates I do not support, and there's no middle ground. So as a voter, for people you're on the fence about, you have to decide which bucket to put them into. While it may feel like approval voting is less fine-grained than RCV, it's actually getting to something very important that RCV is not measuring, namely whether the voter supports the candidate or not. And to me, getting an accurate measure of how much support every single candidate on the ballot has is one of the most important, valuable pieces of information you could get out of an election. So with approval voting, each voter says for each candidate whether they're willing to support them or not. And every voter can support as many or as few candidates as they choose. It's very simple, but it produces a ton of information about what voters want. At the end of an approval voting election, in addition to knowing who the winner is, you know how much support that person actually had. And even better, you know how much support every single other candidate on the ballot had. This is one of the things that I love about approval voting, which is that any candidate can enter a race and bring their ideas to the table and show the world how much voters like those ideas or how much they don't like those ideas. This is incredibly valuable information for citizens, for reporters, for legislators, for candidates in the next election, for anyone who wants to know what voters actually want. So approval voting provides all this information, this clear measure for every single candidate on the ballot of how much voters support that candidate. Ranked choice doesn't do this. Ranked choice produces a winner, but it's not possible to know from the outcome of a ranked choice election how many voters are satisfied with that outcome or how many would have been satisfied with any other outcome. Because in ranked choice, voters never actually say whether they support or don't support any candidate. Another advantage of approval voting over ranked choice is that approval is easier and cheaper to implement. You don't have to change the ballot design or the voting machines. We could implement it tomorrow at almost no cost. It's a tiny, tiny change that basically fixes all of the problems. It's like spending $1 and getting a house. Approval voting is also scalable, so it works easily with any number of candidates, whereas ranked choice gets increasingly more tedious and unwieldy the more candidates there are on the ballot, the more candidates you have to put in order. Ranked choice advocates will often suggest that if you use ranked choice, you should try and find some way to keep the number of candidates under a certain threshold for that reason. So approval voting and ranked choice voting are two entirely different voting methods with different strengths and weaknesses. Both are an improvement over the status quo, but to me, the strengths of approval voting far outweigh the strengths of RCV. That said, whatever method you champion, if you have joined the movement for democracy reform, welcome to the fight, because if we are going to fix all the dire problems facing this country, we are going to need governments that are more responsive to what voters want than they are now. And given how resistant politicians tend to be to changing the systems that got them elected in the first place, it's going to take a lot of voters to make that change happen. If you want to help the Center for Election Science support grassroots approval voting campaigns around the country, go to electionscience.org/Michael and sign up for a monthly donation.